Thanks be to you, the cause for everything, for all that's of true value. I hope that by the end of my blah 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 in this presentation, I'm able to express what that means to at least some degree, because I believe I can never truly do you justice. When I was considering what I might say in this presentation, I was torn between my wanting to talk about everything that's in the book, because I'm at least kind of excited about it, and saying not much at all, being pretty much silent, which is where the greatest blessings are to be found. As the saying goes, if I say something, I'm a liar. If I say nothing, I'm a coward. I'm not going to say I chose to play liar, but that I chose not to play coward. I'll read a bit from the introduction of the book. One can never anticipate where life's greatest gifts might emerge from, through what experience, what form of delivery, or through what characters will be prodded into deeper questioning, challenging our beliefs, provoking our otherwise persistent egos. But if we remain open, good-humored, trust we can be safe acting on the innate desire to welcome connection, and speak our own opinions while remaining curious, reverent of self and other, we will undoubtedly be enriched and perhaps, just perhaps, stir others in the wake of our collective connection. So began the unanticipated encounters of Saint David, who certainly hadn't always been a saint, nor ever accredited as such orthodoxically, and the Roman, yes, his real name. Put simply, our parable started out such that I was someone in need of a job, he was someone who had one to offer. If I've been religious about anything, it's been about my spiritual but patently not religious practice, not a cautious wade in so much as an irreverent plunge. Roman, on the other hand, a Baptist, is devout to a fault, as they say, whoever they are. It's not that Roman announced his devotion day to day, he lived it. The owner of a small landscaping business, he could, for instance, take on a consummately unreasonable spendthrift of a client and still be guilted into cutting her grass for less than he paid his workers. Repeatedly, gratefully, kindness and generosity, often at his own worldly expense, if they be faults, were his. Now, in my opinion, Roman is as much the Christ as everyone else is, that divine, eternal, and changeless self, not an individual, but rather the universal spiritual essence that is grace itself. Not that I perceived him that way when I first met him, and not that Roman would see himself that way either. He'd have considered the idea a one-way ticket to HE double toothpicks blasphemous. Truth be told, I didn't fully realize it myself until after I'd consolidated and reflected on our myriad exchanges, seeing in our story the depth of what transpired, and recognizing that it had proffered an expansion of perspective and taken on a life all its own. At the outset, I thought I'd needed a job, but what I was led to was purposeful, passionate discourse that would in turn facilitate a deepening of my own understanding and an upgrading of my then limited outlook. Our initial work together sparked a connection, a mutual sense of intrigue with another whose beliefs so differed from our own. After I left his employ and went out on my own, for about a year or so, we would send text messages and emails back and forth, sometimes at great length, he sending me his perspective, bolstered by biblical quotes, at least some of which I was inclined to take personal offense to at the time, and me retorting. In some ways, it seemed as though we were each trying to save the other from their misguided beliefs. In hindsight, I'd describe it as a Jacob wrestling with the angel kind of scenario on both our parts. More on this later. In all sincerity, while we differed in beliefs, I have the utmost respect for Roman. I came to deeply value our connection. I'm certainly understating it to say that he became more than a brother to me. That said, when we shared, I always held a little back. I worried that were I to share some of my thoughts, like about a possession experience I once had, for instance, more on that later too, it might jeopardize our friendship and the relationship I'd come to cherish. Then, through no intentional orchestration of my own, an interesting thing happened. One day, I received a text from an unknown number. Now, sometimes when I get spam, I block the sender. Other times, though, I like to have a little fun. When it's so obviously a scam, I might tell them I'm highly intuitive, which by all accounts I am, and put forth a sincere offer to help them redirect their vocation to something more conducive to the innate abilities they possess but may not be aware of, something more fulfilling, lucrative assumedly, but not illegal. Or should they claim to know me, I might say something to the effect of, well, since we're familiar, you obviously know that I like to talk about God, so woohoo, let's get into it. It happened that on this particular day of the Christmas season, I received a very religious message from that unknown number I didn't recognize. I thought it dripping in holier than God sentiment, and I felt smitten, not in a good way. And, well, it's not that I couldn't, but I didn't want to help myself. I let loose, if you will. Contrary to my expectations, though, not only did the spammer reply, they kept doing so. They kept doing so for months. I said all those things that I never would have said to my friend Roman. You may be able to see where this is going. After months of unreserved exchanges with this stranger, it turns out it was Roman all along. What can I say? Spirit knows precisely how unaware this character I've played can be, and to great effect in this case. Roman and I got as real as two people can get, and our relationship did not suffer the falsely feared consequences of the expression of our individuated truths, our varied gospels. It thrived in it. I can't begin to tell you how, to the core of my being, enriching I found these letters, as did my significant other, who basically said, as a book, this could be incredibly helpful. And essentially, this all began to evolve into what we're now reading. As has been said, at least to all appearances, Roman was and is indeed a real person, and I've included some direct quotes from him and biblical references that he did send. But I've also taken artistic license and included conversations that he and I, as characters, never actually had, but that our indelible relationship has inspired, the expansion of which I hope and trust will be engaging, hopefully helpful, and at the very least entertaining. No matter where on the religious or spiritual spectrum you find yourself, you will undoubtedly be rubbed, sometimes perhaps incensed. If you're anything like Roman and I, you'll be called to draw into the light your own misgivings, ideals, judgments, beliefs. You may question or solidify your faith. You may learn or unlearn. I suggest Take it all in. Consider, relate, revolt, release. Any of it, all of it. At the very least, you will be intrigued. At the most, you will be moved, and let's say, wealthier. Though I'm not a fan of the word, it's pretty hard to miss that I use the word God in the book, not least because I'm talking to Roman. I'd rather not use any word for God, in part because the term is so loaded, but more so because it objectifies God. I'd even say it makes God a character. Speaking of which, other characters mentioned in the book include the non-dualist teacher Rupert Spira, Muji, Papaji, Jesus, or the Jesus character, as I playfully refer to him, Swami Sarvapriyananda, and others. And honestly, if the greatest benefit you get from reading my book is that it brings your attention to even one of these teachers, it'll have been worth the effortless effort of writing and publishing. I will say, though, that assuming there is such a thing as truth, this book at least points to it. On the subject of truth, from this character's perspective at least, it seems the reality of existence, of God, is, as I've heard it said, too simple to be true, too obvious to be true, too good to be true, and I'd add, too outlandish to be true. Instead of what I did write, I debated on writing the preface of the book as simply the two words, what if? For instance, what if both our perspectives, Roman's and mine, on God are wrong? Because they're perspectives from or communicated through the perspectives of individuals. What if we're not individuals? It would seem to make sense that if I'm wanting to know not just something, but anything at all, I might want to first look at what's doing the looking. For instance, if God exists, and God is love, and God is everywhere, but I'm not seeing love everywhere equally. In other words, if I'm seeing separate things and judging between them, as in, this is good, this is bad, I like this person or thing or experience more or less than this person, thing, or experience, perhaps there's something wrong with my seeing, with the position I imagine I'm seeing from. It can be difficult being a human being, yes, perhaps even impossible. What if it is impossible? Am I who? Am I what I imagine myself to be? I'll read from the book again, where a section from the chapter Sights Unseen, where St. David is responding to something Roman has said. Yes, but did Jesus have a physical body? Let's investigate, shall we? To do that, we can try to come to truth by reading something about something posited as history, or we can explore our own experience, question our own assumptions. Do you, Roman, have a physical body? What are you? From birth until now, the present moment might not necessarily be all it's assumed to be either, but let's go with it for the time being. Has anything about the you that you imagine you are been consistent or remained constant? Your environment obviously hasn't. Your feelings haven't. Your thoughts certainly haven't. Keep in mind that your body hasn't been a constant either. Consider that science suggests it renews itself many times over. And yes, I realize I'm making an assumption here, but the only thing that has been consistent has been your sense of being, your I amness, assumedly the same sense of beingness shared by all other persons. So what's the I you imagine you've been referring to made up of? Do you have a body, or are you perceiving thoughts about said body? If you're aware of your body, you must be a step back from said body. You must be awareness itself. It might well be said that your awareness, imagining, or dreaming you are what you're aware of. Does that not follow? Spoiler alert, your body is thought. Therefore, your I must also be thought. Upon investigation, it would seem my, and I assume your, I amness as consciousness, your innate sense of presence as existence, is the only constant. If you are not your body, your personage, can anyone else be their bodies, their personages? What if what we are does not end at these seeming edges? There are examples of metaphysical experiences in the book and metaphysical modalities I practice that would appear to illustrate the point that when it comes to psychic communication, say, it's not that there's one physical being over here having a psychic connection to another physical being, say, halfway across town or around the world, but that it seems more sensical to suggest that consciousness is communicating with consciousness via consciousness. That being the case, it seems to this character at least, the miracle isn't so-called metaphysical phenomenon, but that consciousness itself chops wood and carries water, holds hands, tells a dumb joke, maybe even gets nervous speaking in front of itself. There's a miscommunication in the book, not an error, because then I'd have to get my delightful publishing team to clear up yet one more overly OCD detail. It's from page 14 in the book in the introduction. It could well be said that with Wee's appearance, St. David became more scribe than author, the consequence of how the dialogues between myself and Roman changed not just my understanding, but changed my consciousness. But does consciousness change? Throughout the book, this gets corrected on its own. Rather than tell you what I mean by that, I'd prefer if you answered for yourself. So I'm not going to go into the math of it, but let's try this little thought experiment. Close your eyes or keep them open. It's up to you. If you had a different name, would your consciousness still be the same? If you had a different body, like if you had less limbs, or more, or a beak, would your consciousness still be the same? If you were a person in the other room from you, if you were a minion, royalty, a magician, an attendee at the Last Supper, would your consciousness still be the same? What you would be aware of might not be the same, but the experience of being aware would be the same. Further to the point, I would say your experience of being awareness would be the same. From page 113. Existence as consciousness itself is not only constant, it's eternal. It's always on, the only thing that's always on. Appearances, which themselves appear to come and go, exist within it, are dependent upon it. It is not dependent on appearances. It's self-illuminating, illuminates all appearances indiscriminately, including darkness. Sounds suspiciously like God, doesn't it? What if you're all the same? The miracle that is consciousness itself, the miracle that is existence itself, the miracle that's always been. Seemingly too outlandish to be true, too simple to be true, too obvious to be true, too good to be true. As consciousness itself, aren't you everywhere? It's worth asking, where are the contents of your mind? They're out there as much as they are in here, inside our supposed minds. As consciousness itself, is there anything to judge between? Aren't you only ever judging yourself, judging your own projected consciousness, the same as we're apt to do in dreams? As consciousness itself, can you die? Were you born? Must you not have always existed? What you're aware of changed, and because it's changed, can it ever be said to be truly real? But what's aware of what's changed never has, could never have. Existence doesn't exist without consciousness. Not even non-existent exists without consciousness, but that could fill a whole other book. That's not a dad joke so much as a consciousness nerd joke. I'd say that writing this book made me more whole, but it also messed me up. It helped me with realizing oneness as reality because it messed me up, the me I'd imagined myself to be. I came to see truth in what the conversation with the Roman, both the real Roman and the fictional one, was not just inspiring, but revealing. For instance, as had been mentioned earlier, if I'm aware of said body, I cannot be said body. Taking it further, if I'm aware of mind, can I be said mind? What am I if I'm not thoughts about what I am? It follows, does it not, that whatever it is, it's not mind. And if you think I've lost my mind, you're probably right. But you might be losing your mind a little right now too. Fear not. There are benefits to losing your mind. Incidentally, I'm not here to start the zombie apocalypse. Although a world of peace zombies who love unconditionally and do nice things doesn't sound all that bad right now. Am I right? I mean more in the way of loosening reliance on the belief in individual minds and bodies, the result being peace. The impossibility of being unfulfilled. Consider, if you are existence itself, how much more abundant does it get than that? How much more inclusive does it get than that? How much more blissful does it get than that? Hopefully, if we've played our parts well, St. David's letters to the Roman at least points to that.